Hello, guys. Welcome to the Gentleman's Jury. I'm your host, Robbie, and today we're going to be talking about welfare and well, most of the spending going into welfare and how we might be able to cut some of that back and improve upon some systems, things of that nature. First, I'd like to kind of go into the history of some government-supported welfare. One of them is the use of the grain dole utilized in Rome. Really simple concept, right? Rome used to hold on to a ton of food, and what they would do with that food, right, is they would take it, hold it in reserve, and then subsidize it to the poor, and that would kind of help maintain, some of these people who were poor couldn't afford it. Some of them didn't have jobs at the time. Some of them were, kids whose families might have died during some war or something. I mean, there was a lot of reasons for it. And you're probably wondering, well, why do we care about food? Well, believe it or not, for a long time, the majority of people's money went to food. I know that sounds crazy nowadays. And actually, statistically now, based on some research done, most people spend about 35% of your income on rent or mortgage, and then 9% of that on food, right? So we've kind of flipped that switch, and now we're spending more on the house that we live in than we are on the food that we eat. And I mean, we've seen welfare systems throughout history because no one wants to just let the poor die out on the street. I mean, generally, I mean, there's probably some sociopath out there that, or psychopath too. They just don't care. But let's kind of now we'll get into some of how we'll break down some of the spending we've done, right? So the total GDP percent in 2020 that we spent on welfare was 5.75, right? And you're probably wondering, well, how much does that, round out to? And you do some real quick math here. The total, you know, uh, the total federal budget for the fiscal year of 2020 was set at $4.79 trillion. So we just, simply do some math and we find out that roughly $0.23 trillion is what you would have spent on welfare. That translates into about, um, sorry, I'm not really, I don't have the math written down here, but yeah, this is still 5% of 4.79 trillion is still a significant amount. And if you want to break that down even more, right? Of that percentage of GDP, about half, or I don't know, not quite half, but a decent percent goes to Medicaid, which is the overall government pays for the Affordable Care Act, right? That's Medicaid in a sense. Um, and Medicaid spending in 2020, according to the U.S. government spending, was 687 billion. While not on other welfare programs, they spent 1,203 billion. Viewed from the GDP perspective, overall welfare spending increased sharply from 4.6 GDP in 2007 to 7.2% in 2010. In the trough of the Great Recession, other welfare hit 4.5% GDP. But kind of since we've been after 2005, we've steadily started to decline. Right, in 2017 it was 2.3, and has remained. And then Medicaid other welfare dropped to 2.3 in 2017, and Medicaid has remained steady at 3% until 2020 when it went back up to 3.3% GDP. right? So we're spending a lot on the Affordable Care Act and Medicare for All, which is, I mean, it sounds really useful, right? Except most of the time when people are using Medicaid and Medicare and the failed attempt at Obamacare, right? It's affecting our economy in a different way, right? Uh, Not many people know this, but our total U.S. debt to GDP ratio as of July of 2020 is 20.57 trillion, and intragovernmental holdings were at 5.94 trillion. We are the 43rd highest debt to GDP ratio. Here, if you're curious, what is the percentage of debt to GDP, like as a percent and not, in number wise? In 2019, it was 108.19%. In 2020, we've jumped almost 20%. We're now at 127.11%. Now, a lot of that can be contributed to things like stimulus checks and other welfare programs that came out during the coronavirus, right? And the reason that I'm kind of hammering down that we spend a lot of money on these welfare programs is that we've essentially, in a way, right? Welfare can be extremely useful, right? Somebody came out of like the army or lost their job or God knows what else, right? And they just hit really hard times, right? They now have a safety net to catch them. Kind of allows them a little bit of buffer time to get them back on their feet, right? The issue is what the government is doing now, where we're no longer using it as a safety net that acts more like a trampoline where you hit the net, it pops you back up, right? Might take a couple of bounces, but you get there. No, now it's a safety net where they want to. It's almost like trying to catch fish, right? You get them in the net, and then you try to keep them there, and that's what they're doing with the unemployment checks right now. Crazy high. I mean, I would make more on unemployment than I do at my current job, right? That's why a lot of these businesses have hundreds of, I mean, it's a staggering amount of openings for businesses that aren't being filled, because why would you go back to a minimum wage job when the government will just pay you $900 a week on unemployment? I mean, this creates a huge issue, right? Now you're incentivizing people to stay home. You're incentivizing people not to go work. And if places like factories and warehouses and places that actually require manpower to move the product from one place to the other, utilizing people, and they don't have jobs, how are we going to get people at like Amazon to deliver your packages, right? Everyone loves to buy at Amazon. How do you want to how are you going to get the food delivered to the supermarket so you can go buy food, right? Because no one wants those jobs because they don't pay as well. And I understand that not everyone wants to survive off minimum wage, but not everyone has built up the skills in order, or gotten the education required to have a higher paying job. And that's something that you need to take personal accountability of, right? If you made this decision, right, as a high school graduate or high school dropout, not to try and pursue a higher career, and you always seem to get stuck with low income jobs, maybe you need to reevaluate your life. And that might not be applicable to everyone, but personal accountability is something that we just seem to be lacking nowadays. And welfare kind of helps with that, right? Why take accountability for your life when the government will handle it for you? Anyway, so how do we work to fix the system, right? This system that's broken. Well, there's a couple things. We start cutting, some of the federal spending in welfare. I mean, federal spending in general, right? I'm going to do a whole other piece on the 1619 project grants that they're trying to push to schools because that's ridiculous. But how do we cut down on some of these public benefits, right? Well, we get rid of that coronavirus boost for one thing, right? We don't need that anymore. Vaccines are out. People can go get vaccinated if they choose to. If they don't, that's their choice. They're the ones that'll get sick, but the vaccine's available to anyone who wants it, right? So you don't the coronavirus shouldn't be a reason to stay home at this point. We also, they say masks don't work, but everyone's still wearing them, and there's health precautions people are taking, right? So if you cut that extra money that we're spending for the coronavirus stuff like that, I think it's like an extra $300 in uh, unemployment. Now they're making less than what I would make on an average paycheck, which incentivizes people to get back to work. I think that's the point, right? We need to find the systems that are incentivizing people to have 12 kids so that way they can stay on welfare. Find these little loopholes like, oh, I work a part-time job and I do it not because I'm, going to school or something. I do it because if I maintain, only $300 a week, I'll get my other 600 from welfare, right? Because that draws from our resources. And on my last episode, I touched on, breaking away from China. Well, how can we break away from China if we continue to, you know, blow most of our budget just on welfare? I mean, like, at 5.75% of the GDP, you know, out of the full federal budget being 4.79 trillion, we're spending quite a bit. And in case you weren't aware, the total U.S. debt held by the public is 20.57 trillion. I might have gone over that already, but that's still insane. And if we can cut that down, build ourselves up, what will be, and cut some of these welfare and education programs that aren't working or shouldn't be in place or need to be reformed, then we'll actually start seeing some better growth in America. I mean, like, unemployment under President Trump was at like 3%, and let me do a real quick search, and I can tell you that the unemployment, as it currently stands in the U.S., is 5.8%. That's almost we've almost doubled. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's just that's 5.8% of the U.S. population unemployed, and there are businesses asking people to come back to work. But welfare incentivizes them to stay home. And I mean, what's interesting about this is how this is kind of a step in building a welfare state, right? Building a communist like state. If we're all reliant on the government, then some of us get selected to go do jobs, and maybe the government goes, oh, we'll pay you a little bit more, but maybe some of you get stuck being potato farmers and you make just enough to get food. I mean, that's how socialist countries work, and that's kind of what you're promoting here. So we can switch up how we do welfare, and that'll help a lot. And one of the improvements I thought about is maybe what we do right, since food stamps help certain people, but some people abuse them, and those unemployment checks might help some people, but we're definitely abusing those right now. What if we kind of not necessarily gut everything, right? But we relook at how we distribute welfare to people. So what if if only 9% of our income is going to food, right? If you unless you're unemployed and in a situation where you can't work or something, then maybe cut back on food stamps. Maybe only receive it's three or well, let's do half, right? 4.5% of the income that you would spend on food can be covered by the government, but you're in charge of maintaining that other 4.5, right? And then what we do is we do kind of the same thing with the housing, right? You spend 35% of your income on housing. So maybe cut that down from 35% to 15, maybe even 10, right? It's just encouraging you to still try and work while also being able to kind of stay on your feet. And I mean, this is especially helpful because we live in an age now where single mother rates are just through the roof, which is a whole other issue that we'll have to talk about at some point, right? And I mean, also single fathers too. But we live in an age now where maybe these programs help deal with some of our more some of our shortcomings in that area. And then some other ways to improve welfare that you can just think of is maybe kind of start shortening the amount of medical care or the not the amount of medical care we provide, but trying to regulate the medical business practices more, the medical industry more, to make things a little bit more affordable, so that way we can drop that assistance, not drop it like get rid of it, but drop the amount that we have to put into it in order to maintain a healthy population. You know what I mean? Drop like I think, like I said, it was like five. It was a good percent going to Medicaid, just right out of the gate. So if we somehow manage to regulate the businesses to where you know pills and EpiPens and everything aren't $40-$50 a pop right away, maybe try and get that back down to 20 or so. Then that'll slowly start decreasing the amount of money that we have to spend on people who can't afford insurance or whose businesses don't provide insurance. I mean, but then again, that also goes back to personal responsibility, right? If you're in a position where you're working, say, a full time job at a meat packing plant, right? You could probably manage to. I mean, most of the time they should provide some form of insurance for you, but if they don't, you can be. There's workarounds for that. You can find cheap insurances to go through, um, or you can there's set aside a little bit of money. You're probably going to receive some welfare anyway, so you might as well just try and compensate for that. Now that that doesn't apply to everyone. Only certain people might be able to do that. But the idea is to, in general, just start breeding this sense of self-worth back, pride back, you know, taking accountability for what you're doing back. I mean, one of the probably one of the bigger contributing factors, like I said, was single mothers or single parent rates in general, right? Maybe we need to actually sit down and look at what's causing that. See how we can mitigate that, because that might, because welfare. Well, looking at some of the solutions for welfare, right? Welfare is more of a symptom and not a cause. And while we can cut down on some of the more fatty substances of the symptom that are causing us some issues, we really need to start looking at some of the root causes for it. So maybe we take another look at the way that we're encouraging young adults to live their lives as promiscuously as they want. And if that results in a child, then they go, and then they decide to dip or leave, and we're not teaching the value of safe sex, maybe. Or I mean, I don't know what that particular cause is. I'm gonna, in a later episode, I'll probably go in more in depth with some actual research and statistics on it. But there's definitely something to look. There's definitely a point in looking into some of the issues here, right? One of the issues that we spend so much money on, housing and rent, inflation. We're not taking care of our economy, so housing market goes up, loans go up, and now people are paying, double, triple their house, what their house is really worth, and that kind of rises and falls because it's part of being in a capitalist economy. But we might be able to regulate that a little bit better. Cut down on federal spending in general instead of trying to pass a freaking $7 trillion bill like Joe Biden tried to do, right? Look at some of the other causes so that way we can bring down the total GDP that we spend on welfare in general. And try and, if we can mitigate some of those factors, maybe we can get back some of that sorry, the word escaped me there for a second there. Um, some of that self discipline, some of that pride back, where we take care of the accountability, where we take care of what we need to take care of. And I mean that's the real trick, right? We need to look at what's causing these things. I mean that's kind of what Rome did, right? Rome looked at some of the causes for the poor and everything, and realized, well, if we subsidize food and give out some free, it's called the grain dole for a reason, because they gave out free grain, right? And that's how they kind of managed to keep people afloat, right? So maybe what we need to do is, instead of encouraging people to sunbathe in the middle of the ocean before they drown, right? We keep them afloat enough for them to get back to shore. You know what I mean? We stop providing that net that's meant to hold them there, and we start providing more of a trampoline to help bounce them back up. Plus, it'll really help minority communities. I mean, I haven't even gotten to how we basically use the welfare state to control certain groups of minorities, right? I mean, there are tons of statistics on that I'll go into a little bit more when I talk about some of the ways we need to relook at politics in general, especially in the age of racial politics, where everything is all about what race you're part of, and we can really start looking at some of those symptoms, and some of those causes, and this all just kind of bleeds into one another. And I'm just trying to provide you with a baseline of a symptom and some of the causes for that symptom, so we can start working at it. Because as a younger generation, right, eventually it's going to be our turn. We're paying for the sins of our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents, and some costly adventures, and I mean, like, we're spending more money right now than we did, I think, I believe it was it was 1917. That's World War One. We're spending the same amount of money that we spent going into World War One. That's ridiculous. We're not fighting a world war. We're I mean we're You could barely say we're fighting the war on poverty. And I mean, and that GDP percentage, right? It's direct spending. That's not even talking about third party contractors that we might have building homes for the homeless and things like that. You know, it's just a lot of stuff to think about there. Kind of dive into some of the issues there, that and the indirect spending that we have to look at. And I mean that's another symptom, right? And another symptom is the politicizing of the education system. And I mean, I know this was originally going to be on welfare, but I think it's more about, in general, our federal spending habits, and how we're abusing it, really, how we're allowing politicians to abuse it, how we're allowing them to utilize federal money to push their agendas and things like that, instead of just maintaining and running a government. In an earlier episode, I talked about, you know you have a couple of great presidents, right? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln, right? Abraham Lincoln and George Washington are really are great, great presidents, but like Thomas Jefferson, with some of what he did, helped us quite a bit, right? And he could be considered a great president too. I mean, but then you look and most of you probably wouldn't know that you know there was a William Taft, or maybe Henry Taft, or how about Jimmy Carter? Not everyone's heard of Jimmy Carter. I mean, it's pretty recent, so most of us should have, but not everyone. Everyone should remember Ronald Reagan. I mean, Reagan was a pretty big deal. But what we need to focus on, right, is maintaining. Not everyone, most of our presidents are going to be nothing presidents, and we allow people like Obama and Joe Biden and Trump, to go in and kind of run the government off their personality or off their political ideology. Instead of what's best for the people, it's what's best for me. And we kind of need to break politicians of that, and that's another cause, right? It's another cause in the issue of spending, and it kind of goes back into that. What are some other causes for this insane spending? And part of that's involved with China, and I mean, in general, there's just a lot of things to try and nail home here. And I this whole tangent totally just derailed my original topic on welfare, but that's fine. I just we really need to we talk about some of these issues, and some of the crazy like just doing a little bit of research on welfare spending. You're seeing these crazy debt to essentially debt to income ratios for us. We're blowing our taxes that we pay to the government in like 3 days of the government running. They've blown through it. And I'll just kind of give you an overview, right, of GDP spending in total. Government pensions are 14.9% of their spending, right? Welfare is uh, at 17%, and that doesn't that's not just direct. That's also with indirect, right? Other spending 25.5%, and you can defense 10%, education 12%. And if you were like to look into the education, right, you look at these grants that aren't really being used, or if they are, it's by a very select group of people, or it's to push like the 1619 project in schools, by pushing for that schools to accept the 1619 project, because they're going to get a nice big bump in their budget because they get that federal grant. It's ridiculous. And when you look at all their spending, right, you're probably wondering what goes into other spending. Well, that's fire, that's police, that's fire, that's law and courts, that's prisons, that's roads, that's railways, that's airports. They say it's for the legislative, executive, and finance, research, economic development, agricultural, energy, environment, interests on government debt. I mean, that all gets roped into that other category, right? So why are we spending, more on welfare than we are on like policing? Everyone went through that whole big deal with police reforms, right? Well, what if we took some of that, spending out of, failed education programs or failed welfare programs that that could be cut and put that into better policing, better reforms. Maybe start actually having all officers wear body cameras, you know. And there's this dumb idea I had read about where they were like, oh, we should put body cameras and that should go to a public server. No, no, never, because then you get people who want to target police can go onto the server, see the live feed, and go, oh, I know where they're going to be, and then get the jump on them and stuff. It doesn't work like that. And then you're probably wondering, well, what does the pensions all cover? Well, that's just pensions and disability. And the government healthcare is, for healthcare. Education goes through K through 12, college and training. National defense goes through military, foreign policy, veterans, and foreign aid. We always talk about how veterans need help, but then we go and spend more money on, just random bits for environment or energy. They tried to pass that green bill, which would have pulled even more of the GDP over to the environment. Failed environmental and green energy projects, right? I mean, like, there's so much about this spending that we can look at and you just dissect and be like, well, we could cut this and we can improve this and we can, they wanted to pass that massive infrastructure bill this year. I think it was like $2.7 trillion for infrastructure, right? Well, what are they counting as infrastructure? Because and why are we passing a federal bill for infrastructure that big, right? Shouldn't we be, we're allowing the federal government a ton of power when it should be relegated to state and local governments. We I think we're trying to build up instead of trickle down. We should have more responsibility. Local mayors and governors and state representatives should be looking at their regions going, oh, well, this is our spending and that's how we fix it. And then the federal government should just be trying to maintain and pay off our debt and just kind of keep the spending to a minimum so we can, allow growth. But we don't do that. And that goes back to, us individually, having accountability, right? Because, we're accountable for who we vote for. And most of us are voting. I mean, I just look at this last election, right? We're voting for personalities. We're not voting for policies. We're voting for people and not the things that they stand for. And that's the most ridiculous part about all this, right? So that's what we're voting for. And it's totally ridiculous. And I think we need to adjust it. We definitely need to adjust this to a much better and more standardized way of thinking. It's just, I mean, that's just my thought on that. And I apologize for kind of veering off topic there. I realized as I was, looking more and more into, some welfare programs that we could probably work on and things like that, that I was looking at a symptom and not the cause. And we're going to definitely delve into some more causes, so we can actually maybe think about addressing some of these. And I really hope that whoever, the people that are listening, take the time to think about this and talk to other people about it, because it's a really big deal. So, all right, well, I'm going to wrap up the episode here. So I thank you guys all for listening. I remind you guys that you can always check us out on YouTube at The Gentleman's Jury. There's a couple of interviews I've done with some people that aren't, uploaded to Spotify or some of the other websites that this gets uploaded to. I thank everyone who does listen. I really appreciate it. And if you want to tell a friend about us, that helps. That helps me. I mean, it doesn't help me in like a financial way or anything. It just helps me try and put out the idea of, instead of listening to people who just kind of read you the news and talk about what's going on, I'm trying to, you know, get the ideas out there that might fix some of the issues that we keep seeing in the news, and that's the general idea. So if you guys share that with some people, I really appreciate it, and I thank you guys, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.